I'm going to start with a drawing this morning, and it's going to be in vine charcoal, hard vine charcoal, which I find to be a lot like a pencil, but a little bit faster, easier to blend, easier to erase if you make a mistake. And I'm going to get right into the curve of the front of the face plus a mark for the top of the head and the bottom of the chin, left side, right side, just a couple of marks to give my placement of where things might be before I start filling in shadow shapes. I'm going to be thinking the whole time that I need to see a dark shape as a shadow shape and not think of it as hair or eyes or a nose. This mark here is a little bit hard to see, but it's the direction and area that the eyes are found in. Now I'm going to go ahead and using one direction for a stroke, for a crosshatch stroke. I only use the downstroke. So as I fill in the shape, the biggest dark shape that I'm seeing in the top part of the drawing, I might seem to be going up and down, but it's really just a downstroke, which makes it easy to be even and controlled and also easy to blend that. I also tend to think in terms of going across the form instead of up and down, because that makes it much easier to blend the edges. If you go up and down, the direction makes it harder to get a soft line at the beginning of a shape. At the back of the neck here, I'm looking for the shape of negative between that and the dark hair that's behind. So that's a nice little shape that I'm able to use. And now I'm going to be looking for the shape of the eye socket. The eye socket is always, at least unless it's getting lit from light going in some unusual direction, it's always going to be at least a value 5 because it's in shadow. It's an overhang of the eyebrow, causing a shadow in the entire eye socket, unique to each person, the shape of that eye socket, the orbit of the eye. Then there's a shadow shape under the nose, and a shadow shape top lip, and a shadow shape under the bottom lip. And so those shadow shapes, placed at the distance that you see them, start to reveal the continents rather quickly. Now I'm looking to see where are my next shapes of dark. So I'm seeing this whole right side of the face sliding up into the hair is a shadow shape. And it's going to be, again, across the form, because across the form I can blend it a lot more easily, and so it doesn't end up being a harsh edge. You'll see that being developed quite a bit as I go through this drawing. So now we're just developing a little bit more, and I'm thinking in terms of where the neck is. No matter what the lighting on the neck, I'm always going to think in terms that it should be a little bit darker because it's behind and below the face. So even if the light is the same as the face, I'm going to make the neck just a bit darker. So now getting another big dark shape established. And now I'm thinking that the whole entire face portrait has a tone. And in order to have any kind of a highlight, you have to start with a tone to take that highlight from. So if it's all white, there's no place to go with more white. So you have to put a value in. And as I'm doing this, I'm really thinking, what is my value? How dark is it? I usually try to identify a 5 value so that being the middle, I can say how much darker, how much lighter is what I'm seeing. Now we're talking about this blending of the cross hatch and just trying to see exactly what my shape is. And as that shadow shape for the eye socket, that stops at the bridge of the nose, so that tells me a little bit about where the nose ends, which is usually a little bit tricky. People tend to get the nose a little bit too long because they think of it as an L shape, as a symbol of a nose, instead of looking at what is the distance between the bottom of the eye socket and say the top of the nostril, because between the eye socket and the nostril there's a little bit of a light plane that goes alongside the nose that you can always say, how wide is that one? And that gives you a clue as to where the nose is placed. So everything else is just continuing to develop what the shape of every shadow is, and I'm constantly checking if I put a plumb line from the edge of the eye to the right straight down, where would it end? If I put a line horizontally, where would it end? I'm trying to compare everything to the whole painting, the whole drawing at the same time. Right now I'm doing the shape of the darker part of the eye socket, the darker part of the shadow at the eyelashes going into the iris. And it's really important to notice that the white of the eye looks pretty white, but I'm not going to erase anything in order to get that. If I make my darks dark enough, the white of the eye will look very light, even though it still started out as a value 5 shadow. By increasing the darks in that area, the lights look light enough. Big mistake a lot of students make is to erase out the white of the eye, because after all, it's the white of the eye. But always remember, that's inside of a shadow, a deep shadow, and so it's never, almost never, going to be light in that shadow unless there's some really unusual lighting conditions. So now darkening more, because as things are clarified and specified, then I can continue to develop the values to be as dark as I see them. But I start with a medium value so that I can correct a little bit more easily. It's so nice in charcoal to be able to just change at will what you see. Now just the shadow shapes that start to reveal the sunglasses on the top of the head. And I'm thinking at this point, my outside edges, which I tend to finish last because that's the easiest thing to get wrong. And if I do it too soon, if I put an outline around my drawing, it ends up seeming as if it's written in stone and I can't change it. So I usually leave edges for one of the last things I do. But thinking of edges, I tend to think of them as, instead of circular swoops, I think of a straight line with a curve meeting another straight line with a curve, and that I can measure in terms of angle and direction and length. So as you look at drawings that artists have done that you might find and admire, you'll start to notice that a lot of artists, in fact, in my experience, almost everyone, tends to see edges as more straight planes instead of just curves or swoops. For instance, an orange, even though we think of it as round, is a series of straight lines connected by curves. The top is flat, the bottom is flat. It's not a circle like our expectation would indicate. It's actually a series of straight lines or straight edges. Now, a small shadow shape, like a triangle going out into the edge, and all of a sudden, with a dark connection, it becomes an eye rather clearly. Now I'm just trying to see the exact shape of this curve, and I am looking at the shape of the air on the other side. It looks like I'm looking at the forehead, but I'm really looking at the air on the outside, the negative shape, because that shares the edge, but it's much easier to see correctly without an anticipated expectation of what it should look like. Now I'm again connecting and softening edges, letting one shape slide into another shape, so that when I squint my eyes really strongly, when I squint my eyes so that I don't see color anymore, I just see value and the biggest shapes possible. Squinting that hard, you notice that a lot of dark shapes slide into the next shape. It's not, you don't see edges as much, and if you don't see an edge, then I want to say I should not put an edge. An edge is probably my logical mind saying, well, that the hair stops there, and that means that there must be an edge. But if I squint and don't see one, then that means they're really more connected than my expectation allows. And so I must go with what I see when my brain is not engaged. It seems funny, but my awareness and knowledge of what I think I know actually gets in the way of what I should be seeing. I should see without an expectation or thinking I know what something looks like. So the bottom of this shadow shape under the eye, And then I'm going to be noticing exactly how far it is to the next shadow, the top of the nostril. And then how that shadow slides so delicately and softly. And then is everything underneath the nose a little bit darker? I'm going to be checking for that. And sometimes I'm even looking for, since the face is a little bit like a cone shape, is the lower part of the face a little bit darker in total than the top or the lighter, larger part of the forehead and cheekbone. So often that's going to be the case, that the whole lower part of the face is going to be just a little bit darker than the top part of the face, of the head. So looking for just refining shadows, developing shadows, and it becomes a little bit more fussy and a little bit more delicate. And yet, if things are put there in the first place correctly, if you get that initial shadow shape for the lip, the right distance from the nose, then it becomes a lot more easy. I really think of the shadow and light on the head or the portrait as being nicely seen. They're simple shapes and less complicated, say, than a lot of buildings or a lot of landscapes even. I really would prefer to draw a portrait anytime rather than a complicated landscape. As I come into this part of the neck and the shirt, I'm looking at the negative shape under the chin, to the neck, to the shoulder. What's that shape of air that's on the other side? Just almost always, as a rule, I'm going to see what I'm looking at and then say, what's the other side of what I'm looking at? Because that's probably what I should be looking at. First, I'll see the most obvious thing, the face, the nose, and then I'll say, I should probably be looking at the other shape on the other side of this. The negative shape, the shape of the light part between the eye socket and the nostril. What's the shape between the nostril, the lower shadow of the nose, and the top lip? What's the direction of the dark space between the two lips? How does that change? All these little directions, and how dark is it? How long is it? What is the direction of it? What's the angle? And a lot of blending that happens. A lot of smoothing. This part of the drawing is certainly just a little bit more nuanced, and it's just taking what has been done before and just developing it, trying to see how dark is it, Is there another shape of dark, ever so soft, that's inside of the first shape? So I get the biggest shapes and then I adjust them. Here I'm going ahead and making sure that the whole neck is a little bit darker than the face. Shadows. How dark is dark? If I want something to be a 10, I have to get it there so that 8s and 7s are easily rendered. Lots of observation and I guess a great deal of patience. Boy, do I enjoy drawing. It's so rewarding and so intriguing, and as you develop a portrait, it seems to come to life, and it's such a challenge, and yet as you learn to see just the value and the shape of a dark and against the shape and value of a light, it becomes much more possible to get it done and get it done well. A nice drawing is so enjoyable. It puts you into a place where you don't have to think about anything except what's in front of you, what's the challenge that always requires an idea that each drawing will be better than the last, and each drawing will give you some additional bit of knowledge. Even if it doesn't come out to your liking, it still is going to give you something that will add to what you knew before. In fact, sometimes we learn a lot more from our difficult drawings than we do from the easy ones. So I always enjoy the process, no matter what the outcome, and certainly with charcoal I can continue to edit and change and repair until I'm really quite happy with the result. There is a quote that says that a Painting is just a series of corrections. That would certainly apply to a drawing or any artwork. It's always just a series of small corrections until it matches what you see, and after you get comfortable with rendering what you see, you're able to perhaps reduce the number of marks that you have to make and put a little bit of your own personality and your own expression into the drawing so that it is uniquely yours and has something to say beyond just a photographic copy. The better we become, usually the faster we are and the fewer marks it takes to get to the same place. That's a goal worth having. Fewer mistakes, a fresher outcome. And if possible, a drawing every day. Because it's not talent so much as skill. I really believe that we have some instruction and some critique with what we do under instruction, giving us the capability to advance, and I haven't seen too much of it that just comes naturally. It's usually how much practice and time we're willing to put into it. I'm using a blending stump, wrapped paper stump, so that I can make some of these marks a little smoother, a little softer, more than my finger can do. I don't want to use a blending stump too early in the process because it tends to push the tooth of the paper down. I am using charcoal paper that has quite a nice textured surface, which is really helpful to hold the charcoal. Every time you adjust something, you end up having to adjust something else because everything is related, and if you move one thing darker, it usually means that you have to darken something else or blend something else. It's always a moving target, but that's part of the fun. At this point, there's a lot of observing going on, a lot of comparison. I'm just trying to say, what do I need to do that would be the most effective? What have I missed? What am I trying to keep an eye on the whole thing? And it's pretty close to being finished, and so I hope you enjoyed watching the development of a drawing, and you might have found some enthusiasm and inspiration to perhaps attempt something yourself. It helps to have pretty good light and shadow on the face rather than even light makes it really tough. So always choose something that has significant shadow shapes, gives you something to work with. Be sure to subscribe so that you might find information about further videos that I do, and thanks for watching.